Good night. It is now 22:28 here in Albuquerque on the 28th of August 2025. I know today's the 28th without looking at the calendar because today's Thursday. Friday, tomorrow, is my wedding anniversary. That I never forget, never have. And so the day before and the day after are easy for me to remember too. I am, as I've been doing lately, as you know, if you've been watching these videos along, sitting at the kitchen table, Glencairn, bottle of whiskey, phone. This is the best recording setup I've ever had. It is obviously not professional. You saw the title card, thoroughly amateur. If I ever have a production company, which don't hold your breath, I'm going to call it Thoroughly Amateur Productions, and our computer-generated logo, the computer-generated logo, will be an animation of the two pages you saw flipping and the sound effect. This is going to be a Sippin' and Talkin' episode, and that's mostly what I'm recording these days. It is seldom that the rotation brings up a bottle that I haven't reviewed on this channel, simply because I don't have many bottles I haven't reviewed on this channel. You know, so much whiskey, so little time, and so little storage space. I am past the days when $40 was my ceiling unless something really odd happened. I would go months at a time buying whiskey at $20, $30, at most $40. We have finally recovered from a really bad financial time in 2017, almost 10 years ago now, 8 years ago. And we have recovered largely because I switched jobs in August of 2020. Friday's my anniversary. Sunday is the date that I started with Smith's and having left Wally World, which is, don't ever go to work there. It's an evil company. I spent 17 years in their employ. You couldn't pay me to go back. I'd starve first. But I don't have that ceiling. I can go up to $50, $60, occasionally even $70 for a bottle. But there is just so much out there. If I drank a different whiskey every day of my life, or even just a different bourbon, because I'm a bourbon guy, I would probably not get through them all before I died. And I'm only 65. That's how much is out there. So Sippin' and Talkin' today, Rebel 100. This is a wheated bourbon, meaning that instead of the mash bill being corn, rye, and barley, it's corn, wheat, and barley. And there are those who say that wheat gives a softer profile to the whiskey than rye does. There are those who talk about a wheater funk. I can't really detect any difference. I've had traditional bourbons that came across to me as soft. I've had wheated bourbons that to me tasted just like a traditional bourbon. Something in my genetic makeup has got my palate to where it really doesn't distinguish between the two. Now, if there is enough wheat in the mash bill, I do tend to get eucalyptus. I appear to be unique in that. But this is a wheated bourbon. As with all bourbons, at least 51% of the recipe is corn. I don't know the mash bill offhand. It is not on the bottle. And for videos, even video reviews, which this is not, I don't bother to look up the mash bill. I look up all the details, or I look up details when I'm doing a written review on distiller. But we know this is at least 51% corn. We know the secondary grain is wheat. It says right here on the label, defiantly smooth wheated bourbon. I don't get upset at the word smooth, I just don't know what it means. When people say this is smooth, I don't know what they mean. I have never gotten the same definition from two different people. I think it's just a word that means I like it. Well, if that's what you mean, then say that, huh? But let me pour some before I babble on, because I have a direction I'm actually headed. I can leave that there. I can see what I'm doing. Due to the setup, it's actually easier for me to tell how much I've poured by looking at the screen than by looking at the glass, because I'm looking down at the glass but over at the screen, so I can see the level on the screen better. And I want to stick that there, pull it back and over a tad so you can see me. And at this point, you're all probably saying, I don't want to see him, I want to see the bottle, it's better. Well, tough toenails, you got me. But every time I pull out my Rebel, and I have a rotation that I go through, a randomized rotation. When I finish it, I re-randomize it, go through it again. Otherwise, there are some things I'd never get to, some things I'd finish in 2 days. Well, not 2 days. I don't drink that much, believe me. But I have a randomized rotation I go through, and whenever I come to this, I think of Billy Idol. Now, I am not a Billy Idol fan. I've never heard anything he did that I liked. Some I could tolerate, and that's about it. He wears the leather and the spikes, and he looks like he'd be a heavy metal type a la Rob Halford of Judas Priest. And then he sings what almost sometimes is soft rock and never is really as heavy as you'd expect just by looking at him. He has one song, though, called Rebel Yell. With a rebel yell, she cried, more, more, more. You may or may not know that. Some people know rock, some don't. If you don't, I feel sorry for you. But he got the title, not the content of the song, but the title he got when he was backstage at a Rolling Stones concert years ago. He saw Mick Jagger and Keith Richards swigging from a bottle of Rebel Yell bourbon. Now, Rebel is the current name of what used to be Rebel Yell. They changed the name of it, but not all the way. And I've seen pictures of old Rebel Yell labels, and it had a guy on horseback waving the battle flag of the Army of Northern Virginia. Now, the Confederates were not rebels. They were not, repeat again, not trying to destroy the United States nor overthrow the U.S. government. They just wanted to go off on their own and do their own thing, just like the 13 colonies did not even 100 years before. There did not need to be a war, and the United States would have survived. That nonsense about saving the Union was the purest ray serene. It was it was the unadulterated feces of a male bovine. But that's where that song Rebel Yell got its name, was from a bottle of what is now Rebel whiskey. This is 100 proof. The first Rebel I had was 80 proof. I hated it. Took me a year or more to try the Rebel 100, and in that interval I learned something about proof and what it can do to the flavor. And this stuff I like. It's smoky on the nose. You see me sniffing and I have to tell you it's on the nose? Yeah, you ain't that dumb. You're not politicians or judges. You're smart. By the way, a lawyer is the larval form of a politician. And by the way, you know what the difference is between a lawyer and a catfish? One is a scum-sucking bottom feeder. The other is a fish. But it's smoky. There's definitely grain in there. I don't believe this is a very old whiskey. It is straight whiskey, so it's at least 2 years old. There is no age statement, so it's at least 4 years old. But I wouldn't guarantee it, or I wouldn't even want to guess that it's much, if any, older than that. And there's not necessarily anything wrong with young whiskey. Some of it's right good. Got a nice mouthfeel. It gave me honey on that first sip, and I've never done this, and I don't believe in any video I've ever done, but I need to pause this because I have something that has just come up I have to take care of. Okay, I'm back. I do apologize. That is one good thing about the pause function, which, as I say, I don't believe I've ever used before. You can go and do something and not have dead air. So, I was a sniffing and a tasting and a jabbering. Definitely smoky, definitely grainy. Grain forward is the term. Whatever is the most prominent note on the nose or on the palate is forward. You know, if something gives you an immediate, definite smokiness, it's smoke forward. If it's honey, then it's honey forward. If it's fruit, it's fruit forward. And I think I am getting something sweet on this, and corn will give you sweetness. I took that sip, and honey just bloomed across my mouth. And bloom is not a term I normally use. I got it from Casey Allen of Beautiful Bourbon. I've said it before on this channel. I'll say it again. If you ain't subscribed to him, go do it, please. The dude is entertaining. He is also an executive bourbon steward. He went through the course from the, I think it's the Thief and Stave Society. It's one of the organizations anyway that oversees that sort of program. They're calling it a bourbon steward rather than a sommelier, and I like that. Whiskey and wine are two different things. Now, if you like wine, fine, but it's not whiskey, and whiskey is not wine. But he's an executive bourbon steward. He knows what he's talking about, and his palate, generally at least, is congruent with mine, which is always good. But, you know, if he hated everything I liked and liked everything I hated, I'd still be subscribed to his channel. He is entertaining. He will not bore you, I guarantee it. I might. He won't. But he uses that word bloom, and apparently it comes from the coffee world, where when you put the water on the grounds, the water just blooms across there. He uses it to describe how it blooms, how it spreads across his tongue. As I say, I don't use it often because I almost never get what I would call a bloom. But at that sip, the honey bloomed across my tongue, and then in its wake came brown sugar, and then after that cinnamon. And those are, the cinnamon and brown sugar at least are typical bourbon notes, you know, and there's nothing wrong with typical bourbon notes. On the Stuff and Whiskey channel, sometimes Aaron will sniff something or taste something and say, it smells like bourbon, it tastes like bourbon. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that. If it didn't smell and taste like bourbon, then, well, it might still be good. My favorite whiskey in all the world is Balcones Texas Pot Still Bourbon, which does not taste hardly at all like any other bourbon or any other whiskey on earth. Its closest resemblance in the things that I have personally tasted is to another Balcones whiskey, Baby Blue Corn Whiskey. On that sip, I got the other things I've already mentioned, plus there was some red pepper mixed in there. Now, generally speaking, everybody else gets spices from rye. Red pepper, black pepper, what have you. That rye is, for them, spicy. It doesn't do that for me. It tends to give me a mineral note and kind of a generalized vegetal note. It always brings to mind mullein. If you haven't seen mullein, it sends up this thick, or this stalk with all the flowers in a sort of a spindle at the top. And I haven't seen mullein in years. I couldn't tell you what it smells like or what it tastes like, but that's what rye tends to give me, is that mineral note like granite dust, and a vegetal note that makes me think of mullein. I don't get a lot of spice from rye. What the spiciness I detect is probably coming from the barrel. And you can get spice from the barrel. You can get sweetness from the barrel. The cinnamon and the brown sugar is coming from the barrel. When they char the barrel, of course, it turns the outer surface essentially into charcoal, which makes me wonder about the point of the Lincoln County process that Tennessee whiskey advocates put so much store by. You're charring the barrel anyway. So there's your charcoal filtering right there. I don't know what real function the charcoal mellowing does. They say it makes a difference. Maybe it does. But the charring of the barrel gives you that charcoal layer, but the heat also alters the chemical composition of the wood further into the staves. Now, I can't give you details, I can't name things. Randy Sullivan can on Bourbon Real Talk. Daniel Whittington can on the Whiskey Vault. I can't. But it breaks down certain compounds, it does various things, and so you get flavors from the wood that aren't in the original whiskey. And each sip I'm getting more. On that one, in addition to everything else I've talked about, and I'm checking the time, we're at 20 minutes. So I need to get back to where I intended to be all along. But in addition to everything else, I got this kind of sugary sweetness in addition to the brown sugar that's there. But what I wanted to say is there's nothing wrong with Rebel other than the fact we weren't rebels. We were seeking our independence from the United States. The same country which had fought a long, difficult war to get free from Britain fought a long and difficult war to prevent us from getting free of the United States. And some of the vestiges of that oppression are in the fact you can't call it Rebel Yell anymore. People will pitch a fit. I'm surprised they can still call it Rebel and get away with it. Because, right or wrong, the term rebel in the American mind means Confederate. And in the general American mind, Confederate means evil. Never mind that we were fighting for the same principles as George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and all the rest, Daniel Morgan. You know, all the others who, whether they signed the Declaration of Independence or not, really did pledge their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. We were fighting for the same things they were. Never mind that. Never mind that if Abraham Lincoln had just let us go, there never would have been any war. Never mind that. To the American mind, Confederate means evil. Never mind that slavery lasted longer in the North than it did in the South. Never mind that only 1 or 2%, even in the South, ever owned slaves. Never mind that. To the average American mind, Confederate is evil. Now, this isn't a political channel, it's a whiskey channel. And you may be sitting out there wishing I'd shut my mouth on this particular subject, and I will. But with a name like Rebel, it's going to bring it to my mind. I'm a Texan. Adopted, yes, but a Texan. And Texans distinguished themselves in the war. It was at the Wilderness when Robert E. Lee was beginning to despair of ever moving the northern line that John Bell Hood's Texas Brigade come up, and Robert E. Lee immediately perked up and said, "Texans always move them." That was also the time where Robert E. Lee tried to ride up to the front with the Texas Brigade, and his own men grabbed the bridle of Traveler, his horse, forcibly turned him around and said, "General Lee, we're not going up there until you go to the rear." And the cry went up, "General Lee to the rear." Robert E. Lee was not a coward, but his place was not right up on the fighting line, but at least somewhat to the rear where he could direct the battle. Although nobody could direct the entire Battle of the Wilderness, that was wooded country. You couldn't hardly move except on the roads. You could control what you could see, and that was it, and you could not see much. But I'm at 24 minutes. I intended to be done a minute ago. Last night I recorded a video and didn't realize till I'd done with it. I had picked up the glass and forgotten to close the video before I hit the button. So tonight I want to remember. I don't know that there is a particularly southern toast. So let's make one, because I am in a southern mood. You hear how I talk like that all the time. It's not something I put on. This is how I naturally talk. Except in certain contexts, I'll get more formal in my grammar and my diction. And there's a difference, by the way, between grammar and diction. But I'm in a Southern mood, I'm in a Texas mood, and so you don't have to agree, you don't have to join me, but I am going to say, the South shall rise again. God bless Dixie.